Hi, welcome back to Dirt Bike Racer. This is chapter 6. My father, Tony and Mike came with me to the sports store where I bought my riding gear. Boots, pants, gloves and a helmet with a mask. The complete bill came to much more money than I had, of course, but all it took was my father's signature for me to get a 90-day credit. I thought that was great. I was sure I'd be able to pay up the bill by then. By Wednesday evening, the mini bike was all repaired and ready to roll. I could hardly wait for Thursday to give it a spin. But where could I go? It was illegal to drive mini bikes on the sidewalks or streets, and our yard wasn't any bigger than a postage stamp. Even if I were able to drive around on it, the neighbours might complain of the noise. Some fun, I thought. You didn't have to have a licence, but you had to get out to the boondocks to ride. My excitement died like a quenched fire. For the first time in my life, I wished we'd lived in the country. I'd have acres of land to ride around on then. Well, maybe I could talk my mother into driving me and the Mini to Turtleback Hill, and maybe Tony would consent to come along. I suggested the idea to my parents. Right off the bat, I could see they weren't too crazy about it. Are you sure you can take your mini bike there without asking for permission first? My father wanted to know. I think so, I said. Make sure, my father said. Do you know who owns Turtleback Hill? Yes, Casey Jones. Why don't you call him up first? But I don't have to, Dad. I'm sure. He looked at me with those blue eyes of his that could become really stern at times. They were stern now. Do you mean to tell me that you can't get on his property and drive around his track without saying a word to him at first? He said. If that's the case, every kid in the country with their bike would be there, tearing up the dirt. Well, I hesitated and maybe blushed a little. I hadn't thought about that. OK, I'll give Mr. Jones a call. It won't hurt, replied my father. 2 minutes later, I came back into the room, my face a shade redder than it had been 2 minutes earlier. My father and mother looked at me. I can ride all right, I said, but it'll cost me. How much? Asked my mother. $5. That's what I thought, said my father. OK, now that we have settled, your mother can take you and your bike to Turtleback Hill. I felt too sheepish to grin. Thanks, Dad, I said. I went over to Tony's house and asked him if he could come along with me to Turtleback Hill in the morning. He said he couldn't. He and Mike were going to Syracuse with their father to attend a boat show. Mr. Franco was a fanatic about boats. He was always buying and trading and looking. They invited me to go with them, but I didn't want to. Thanks, Tony, I said, but the sooner I start riding the bike, the better. The next morning, my father helped me load the Mini into the trunk of the car. It almost didn't fit. He had to tie the trunk door down with a wire to keep it from bouncing wide open. My mother drove him to work. He was a mechanical engineer at a firm that manufactured boating equipment. Then she drove me to the track. Before we left him, my father offered some words of caution. Be careful with that mini bike. Keep your speed down. Learn all you can about the bike before you start turning it loose. Know what I mean? Yes, I do, Dad. OK, see you this afternoon. My mother and I headed for Turtleback Hill and arrived there in about 20 minutes. Casey Jones wasn't home, but his wife was. She said he had to drive to Aldell for something, but that she was expecting me. I gave her the money for use of the track, then removed the Mini from the trunk of the car. Where's the track? My mother asked curiously, looking among the hills for it. About a quarter of a mile away, I said, down that road. I pointed to a narrow dirt road that turned sharply to the left from the one we had come in on. It turned through a patch of woods, beyond which was the track. Do you want me to drive you to it? My mother asked. I grinned. No, Ma, I can ride this thing there. I got on the Johnny Joe and kicked the starter. The engine sputtered, then died. I kicked it again and it popped to life. I gave it throttle, twisting the grip on the right handlebar back and forth. The roaring sound was great. The feel of metallic power under me made my heart beat with joy. I looked at my mother. Are you sure you'll be all right? She said. I'm sure, I answered. Okay, I feel better if I wait here just to make sure you don't kill yourself. See you in about an hour, okay? Sure, Ma. Then she parked the car and I headed for the track. Just beyond the trees was an open field, flat as a pancake and surrounded by a wire fence. Bikers used it to practice on before they took to the track. I rode back and forth for a while, getting the feel of the bike. The field was bumpy and it was rutted by rain and by hundreds of other bikes that had ridden here. Then I drove through an open gate to the starting point below the first hill. It was the steepest hill of the track. I gunned the engine and took off, feeling the bike move under me so fast that it almost left me. Hold it, man, I said to myself and eased up on the throttle. I might have climbed the hill if I had continued on, I don't know, but I turned and coasted back to the starting line and tried it again. I didn't give it as much juice this time, just enough to get good motion. But the Johnny Joe bounced like a bucking bronco going up the hill and got out of control. I tipped over, but just as I was rolling off the bike, I turned off the throttle and let the ground come up and meet me. My leg grazed the dirt and my left elbow took part of the shock as I felt an electric jolt shoot up my funny bone. I scrambled to my feet, picked up my bike and once more coasted back to the starting point. I sat looking at that hill for a while, a great big monster waiting for me to challenge it again. I wasn't angry. I wasn't disappointed. I enjoyed the challenge. Okay, baby, I said. This time we're gonna do it. We didn't. We climbed further up the hill this time, but I hit a bump that I hadn't seen, and once again the Mini went one way and I the other. Fortunately, both the Mini and I came out of it unscathed. But now I decided to continue on instead of going back down to the starting line. I didn't want to waste most of an hour trying to climb the hill, although I realised that in a race, climbing that hill meant an awful lot in determining the winner. I rode around the track, taking it easy, remembering all Mike Franco and my father had told me. Neither one of them had warned me about the bumps. I had to find that out for myself. The bumps, the skids, the quick acceleration, the instant I twisted the throttle grip. It was a lot different from riding a bicycle, but a lot more fun too. I went around the track twice. The third time around I heard another sound, the roaring, loud, droning sound of another bike. I didn't turn around. I could tell by the sound that whoever was coming up behind me was no amateur at bike riding. The sound crept closer. A moment later, I realised there was more than one bike behind me. There were at least two. Before I had more time to think about them, two motorcycles zoomed by, one on either side of me. Neither one of the riders looked at me, but I recognised their bikes, their helmets, their jackets. They were Lug Manier and Skitch Bentley. Before I circled the track, they came up behind me again, then up alongside me, slowing down to keep abreast of me. I glanced from one to another, a gnawing feel growing in my stomach. Were they trying to scare me? Perhaps see me lose my cool and control of my bike? If so, they were beginning to succeed. My hands were getting slippery from sweat on the handlebars, and beads of sweat were dripping down my face. Suddenly they both cracked a smile and waved at me. I waved back, smiling too, a forced smile. Then they burst ahead, dirt flying from their rear wheels. I circled the track once more, waiting for them to come up behind me again, but they didn't, and I wondered whether they had left. There was a wood building close to the starting line. I remembered that its large windows had been open in the rear and front when Tony and I had been here at the races last Sunday. They were closed now. I looked for Lug and Skitch, and for their bikes. I showed the engine of my Mini down and listened to them. I heard nothing. I rode around the track a few more times, then saw a car drive in at the open gate. It was my mother. Her face was a picture of utter gloom. And as I rode up to the car, "Oh my!" she exclaimed. "You're so covered in dirt, I hardly recognise you." "Are you all right?" I grinned. I really felt good. "I'm fine, Ma," I said. "Know what? This baby rides like a charm. Now I know why they call it a dirt bike," she said, and she smiled.